Thank you, Mira, and welcome everyone. We are excited to be with you today for another episode of Future of Engineering. And we have a release from our study from the Firm of the Future around workforce. And I know this is a hot topic for everyone. We shared some of the very high level results at the fall conference last month, but we want to really dive into all the details. And we have done one webinar already looking at the young professional aspect of this. And if you haven't seen that, it is recorded and on our website, so you can go back and watch that. But the purpose of today's session is to really dive into the data across the entire report. If you haven't seen the report yet, it is big. It's nearly 100 pages. And so lots of great reading in there on a lot of different topics, but we're going to try and hit kind of the treetops of all of those today. We have with us the author of the report, Joe Bates, who I know many of you know and have seen in the past. He is our senior research consultant at the Institute. And we are also joined by Rodney Chester, who is the CEO and board chair at Gresham Smith, and he's also the chair of ACEC's Workforce Committee. So a great tie-in for us to have some perspective from Rodney on what the Committee is up to as it relates to some of these areas that we're going to uncover, as well as a bit of a CEO perspective and what he's seeing and hearing from his peers around the country as well. So welcome, Rodney. Thank you for joining us. Joe, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to get us started. At the end, we will have a QR code so that you can get access to the report if you haven't seen it yet.
All right, thanks, Daphne. And also just another note that we will be sharing the presentation today, as well as the recording. So you will be able to access both of those at a later time. And we have a lot of data to share with you today. And Rodney, I'm so happy you're here with us today as well. Rodney's going to chime in at various places and offer his perspective. I have, excuse me, I have so much data to share with you all today that it may be a little overwhelming, but I think it's so important to really dive into this data and to understand the big picture as well. So we'll be showing you lots of details, but painting that picture for you about not only what I call the workforce population statistics, but also the survey of the workforce that we conducted. So there's really two pieces that I'm going to share with you today. As part of this overall project, we conducted qualitative one-on-one in-depth interviews as well, but we're not going to go into those details today, but that is also included in the full report. So I want to start out with these workforce population statistics, and sort of to set the stage. Just I want to talk about the different generations that we currently have. Now, on a lot of my slides, you're going to see the years 2023 or 2022. So the last year that all of the data is available that I was crunching and aggregating and pulling together was 2022 and or 2023. So we looked at a time period of 2013 to 2022 for most of these population statistics. So please keep that in mind. And obviously, we'll update this data as we go into the future, but this is what we have available to us. One of the interesting things is, to just help again set the stage, is currently millennials who are in that age bracket of 27 to 42 years old right now, they're now out of college. They're in the workforce, and they are the largest group of the population. The baby boomers used to be the largest group of population. However, they are aging, and they are now between 57 and 77 years old. Again, this was a couple of years ago, so just keep that in mind. But they're now only 21% of the population. To put that in a bit more perspective, the baby boomers reached their peak size in 1999. Now, you might ask, Joe, why is that? They were born between 46 and 64. Well, we obviously have immigration, and so people who fall into that age bracket have, of course, migrated to the United States, become permanent residents, etc. So the largest, in terms of millions of people, the largest period of time that the baby boomers were alive was in 1999, and they comprised almost 79 million people in the United States. That was 28.3%. of the population. So that's why when we talk about how big baby boomers were, that they were big, 28%. That's a huge percentage of the population. But again, they have started to age, and some of them are no longer with us, sadly. Now, the millennials won't actually peak until 2033. So that age group is going to continue to grow, and because again of migration. Now, you may ask, what effect might migration have in current migration policies? Obviously, that could have a slowing effect of the growth of this age group, but this age group is still growing, and they are the biggest age group that we have. So that's to set the stage here for some of our other data that I want to share. Now, between 2013 and 2022, again, that 10-year period of time, we actually saw the college age students decline. The number of college age students declined by 3.3%. This is even as the population as a whole is growing by almost 6%, up to 334 million. So this was something that has been of great concern, that the college age population is shrinking as those millennials that we just talked about were aging out of college. In the meantime, we've seen the baby boomers move solidly into retirement, and then the tail end is heading into retirement now. And we're also seeing Gen X moving into the retirement or the pre-retirement years. So we're seeing a reduction of the population in the 45 to 54-year-old range, and an increase in the 55 to 64-year-old range. So this is really important because again, this is setting the stage for what our workforce looks like and what it's going to look like over the coming decade. So more and more people who are nearing retirement age, and we're seeing a smaller group of individuals coming out of college, or I should say in their college age years. That's an important distinction. So let's look at the college age enrollment information. So again, despite actually declining college age population, college enrollments increased during this period by almost 4%. So you might say, well, how is that possible, Joe? And I would tell you that we had a higher percentage of college age students were enrolling in college, so that helped. We also had an increase in what we call older students. So those who were ages 25 or older, they increased as well. And then the third bullet is that we saw a huge, huge increase in the number of international students enrolling. So these three factors are what kept the college age, I'm sorry, the student population in college growing despite the college age cohort declining. And I can also tell you that you'll see all the sources noted in the footnotes in the bottom of all these slides. This is very well sourced data. You know, one of the reasons we went through this exercise was because we realized that people were pulling pieces of data from lots of different places, and we needed to have one base of really solid data from which we could do our analysis. All right, so international student enrollment actually grew even faster. That again helped to make up for the fact that we have fewer college age students during this time period. So you see international student enrollment grew by almost 21%. You can see the percentage increase in four-year degree as well as graduate degrees. Now, and that was over a 10-year period. But then in the 2023-2024 school year, I do have that piece of data, and we saw international students growing to 957,000. So almost a million international students were enrolled in the four-year degree granting university in 2023 or 2024, either at the four-year degree level or the graduate level. All right, so you would say this is all good news so far. And then we saw, let's look at the graduating students, okay? So not just enrollments, but also how many people are graduating, because there's this common misperception that we were seeing fewer students actually finishing their college degree. And in fact, during this period of time that we're looking at, we saw increases beyond the enrollment increases. So more students were actually completing their degrees than previously. And so that has helped work to sort of help the workforce as well. All right, so here's where we get to the good news, bad news. Let's look at engineering degrees. Again, overall, we had more students graduating from colleges and universities over that 10-year period. We had more international students, we had more older students. But when we look at engineering, we see that there is a good news, bad news story because we did see a 23% increase in engineering student graduates over this 10-year period. But the devil's in the detail here. If you look at the bottom of the screen, the number of students with an engineering degree actually started to decline before the pandemic. In 2019, there were nearly 214,000 engineering graduates, and that was 11,000 more than we saw 3 years later. So we're actually seeing a decline. It's starting to see a decrease in the number of students graduating with engineering degrees, despite all the good news that I just shared with you in terms of college enrollments and college graduation rates. Then, when we look at what I'm going to call our core ACEC focused degrees. These are students graduating with a civil, mechanical, or electrical engineering degree. We saw even more students in that 10-year period. But again, starting in 2019, we saw these graduates start to decline. So this is again good news over that 10-year period, but we're starting to see a decline in the graduates that we're actually needing to work for us. Roddy, did you want to share your perspective on this?
Yeah, just a couple of quick points. One, even if we go back to 2013, there probably was a shortage even back then. So even though the number may have increased, say from 13 to 19, it was not enough to fill that gap. And I do think that, where we're all filling it now is, the age or the experience level where between 13 and 19, now those individuals will be having, 6 to 10 years experience. And that really is where our big gap is. I think I'm hearing from, we had an ACEC forum that, there's a lot of discussion of, despite the numbers, most firms were saying, I can still find close to the number of people I need straight out of school, but it's those that's got 2 to 10 years experience is where I think the bigger struggle is.
Yeah. Yeah. And these numbers of graduates, as we said, they're declining, but not huge declines, right?
And I will
But
just add also what doesn't show in here also is we're probably losing more of them to another industry today than we were back in 2013 as well.
right. And that's information we simply don't have at the moment. And so that's a really good point to make as well. So let's look at international students graduating with any engineering degree. They increased as well over this 10-year period, but by a smaller amount. We're not seeing sort of the same proportion of international students going into engineering as we had seen previously. We're seeing more international students, but not quite as many of them are focusing their studies on engineering. However, look at that PhD level. The numbers are fairly small, but huge percentage increase there. We also look at the international students that are focusing on that core engineering degree, again, civil, mechanical, electrical, and again, we see increases there as well. But again, we saw that starting in 2019, even the number of international students graduating with an engineering degree or with a mechanical, civil, or electrical engineering degree has fallen as well. All right, so you'd think with all these international students, we'd still see more, students coming out of school who are able to work. But we did a lot of work on the H-1B visa side of the issue. And so what we found was that we estimate based on a variety of sources here that you can see at the bottom, that only 9% of those international students who are graduating with an engineering degree were able to obtain an H-1B visa. Only 9%. And this was in 2022. So there were literally, in just that one year, tens of thousands of international students who were not granted an H-1B visa to work in the United States. Now, in the report, we detail some caveats to that. International students are allowed to apply for what's called OPT and stay in the U.S. to work for a year. If they're in a STEM field, they can again ask to extend that for another 2 years. But that's a very tenuous situation. And I don't know, Rodney, if you have any comment about that. But to me, it seems if you're an employer, you're not necessarily looking for a student who may temporarily be here and then they're going to leave in 2 years after you've, just started to get them onboarded.
No, absolutely. And I think our firm's similar to others that I've talked to in terms of, in the past, say, 5 to 10 years, I mean, we've hired as many of those as we can find with the expectation that they're going to be able to eventually get an H-1B visa. But our success rate is very close to this. We're only maybe 10 to 12% of our applicants are getting selected for the H-1B visa, and their time of being able to extend their OTP is for some of ours is starting to run out.
Yeah. So they may help a little bit, but if there's no permanent path for being able to stay and work, then again, we're losing a lot of these international students who have come to the U.S. to study engineering. So we looked at sort of the incoming pipeline, right, of students, and we also had to look at the outgoing side of the pipeline, retirements and what we call separations. And to Rodney's point, Rodney, each year the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that 6.4% of workers leave the field that they're in. Now, this is across all professions. They don't have this data specifically for the engineering field, which would be really helpful to have, but they just don't calculate it and collect it in that manner. So we use these averages to estimate the number of individuals retiring and or leaving the profession in 2022. Again, that's the year that we're focusing on. So we had roughly 1.66 million individuals who were employed as any type of engineer. And so we estimate that there were 184,000 or so engineers that retired. And then we drill down into those core ACEC fields of civil, mechanical, and electrical engineering, and we estimate that 85,000 or so retired or left the field. All right, so let's bring all these numbers together. And the bottom line is when you look at the number of new available workers coming out of school, graduating with an engineering degree, and you look at those engineers who are leaving the field or retiring, there's a gap of 18,000. That was in the year 2022. 18,000 that people that left that we couldn't replace. And if you look at those core fields, that gap was about 8,000. So again, this doesn't take into consideration other potential temporary workers who may be coming out of school on OPT but this is our estimate, and it gives us a level playing field at least to really understand what's happening with our workforce. And again, the report has some other caveats to it because the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed that, in fact, we saw the number of engineers increase from 2022 to 2023. So, how did that happen? Well, perhaps we didn't actually see retirements at the same level as the overall industry, or perhaps not as many left the field. Perhaps some came back into the field that had left previously. So, there's a lot of caveats here, but the bottom line is that we simply are suffering through a worker shortage that everybody has felt, but we wanted to put the numbers together so that we have these numbers to share with you all.
Joe, just real quickly on the mention of the retirement, I mean, I do think there is an area where everyone in the industry can maybe capitalize on doing things to try to encourage those that might be fully retiring to stay in the industry longer. It's also that they've got the most experience as well. So, maybe they roll out of some management positions, but they roll back into, project related positions. At least at our firm, one thing we did that's been very beneficial and successful was that we dropped the number of hours required to still maintain full health care benefits. So if someone's still working 24 hours a week on average, we still pay their full health care benefits. And that's really been a tremendous, positive in terms, quite a few people that made the difference in them deciding to continue to work longer, at least from a part-time standpoint.
Sure, and I think that's really helpful, Rodney, because we hear that anecdotally from others as well, that they're doing what they can to hold on to the older workers, and so I think there's a variety of ways that firms are doing that, and that's kind of it's the wick is perhaps getting shorter and shorter on that candle, right?
Absolutely.
I,
Daphne, do we have
I
any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I do. And I was just going to say, I think, what Rodney just brought up is as much a part of the story as what you've been sharing, Joe, right? Like the recruitment, obviously you got to get them in, but keeping them in is a big piece of the challenge as well. Um, so I've got a question here. You would think with the economy the way it has been since COVID, potential retirees would have slowed down and be available to enter into the workforce and contribute. Do you have any statistics, Joe, around this?
Yeah, so the data, the piece of data that I would point to on that is the workforce participation rate.
Mhm.
And that's something I talk about a lot in our quarterly business sentiment survey and our economic update because we did see sort of a long-term trend before the pandemic of a declining workforce participation rate. That was indicative of baby boomers retiring, right? So people who could retire were, or I'm sorry, who could work were choosing not to because they were retiring. After the pandemic, we actually have seen a decline of the labor force participation rate. There were people who left the labor force because of the pandemic or during the pandemic for whatever reason, and they have not come back. We still have not, in terms of that participation rate, we are a couple million workers below where we were before the pandemic. So we're not seeing people come back out of retirement, at least not this sort of in a broad statistical analysis.
And Joe, just to build on that, are we seeing increase in young parents leaving or at least wanting to switch maybe to something more flexible, maybe that part-time piece like Rodney was talking about? Any statistics on that?
Yeah, I don't have a hard data to share with you on that, but anecdotally, and there are some pieces of data that have pointed to individuals who left the workforce to take care of families and they just did not come back. So that is certainly a potential pool of labor that is available at some point, perhaps in the future when those individuals decide, okay, my children are old enough and I'd like to go back to work.
I
So we
think
have
I
heard
think we
about that
saw
anecdotally.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
saw that for young children, but then also for elderly, right? That were taking care of their parents, especially
Uh,
coming out of
yeah.
COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. That's correct.
And I'll
So
just add,
yeah.
Joe, for the young parents. I mean, we have, most firms are like us that, hey, we're a hybrid. We expect people to be in the office roughly 3 days a week. And we have found that, we've added an additional flexibility of new parents, if they choose, can work, mostly remote for say up to the first year after having a child. And I think that has made a tremendous benefit as well in terms of parents that otherwise might have decided they could just pull out of the industry.
Yep, that's a really good point. So it's a good segue into the survey data because one of those issues, and we're going to talk about a lot of, again, there's a lot of data here from the survey. It's a workforce survey, and we conducted this survey among 2,000 individuals. They are comprised, the respondents are comprised of engineers as well as non-engineers. So people who are in marketing or operations, such as finance and IT. So we surveyed the entire engineering workforce. In addition, we surveyed 200 engineering students who are either juniors or seniors or some graduate level as well to get their perspectives on a variety of issues, such as career motivations, what they look for in the ideal employer, what skills people feel are going to be needed in the coming years to be successful, And we sliced and diced this quite a few different ways, more ways than we're going to be able to share in the time we have allotted today. But the report it will show you that we look at the data in terms of students, in terms of young professionals in the industry, in terms of older professionals. There's also mid-career professionals, of course, but they're pretty much like the average. So when I don't talk about mid-career professionals and I'm showing you overall data, those are pretty much indicative of the mid-career professionals. And then we look at engineers and non-engineers as well as executives. So there's a lot of comparisons that you'll see in the full report, and we're going to touch on a few of the more salient and I think interesting differences as we go through the survey data. All right, so career motivations. Why did you pursue your current work field or discipline? And we worded it as such, again, because there are engineers as well as non-engineers within the survey data. You'll see the purple here are engineers. Engineers, by and large, 69% said, I enjoyed math, science, and technical subjects in school. That's sort of the number one leading reason that engineers became engineers. Now, despite the fact that non-engineers are not engineers, they still are in this field in part. 30% of them say, yeah, I enjoyed math, science, and technical subjects. So there are still people that are working in firms who are not engineers who are, drawn to the field because of that. The number two and number three reasons that engineers are engineers is I wanted a career with strong job security and good compensation, and I was passionate about building things or solving problems as a child or teen. So those I think are make sense. That I think they're very intuitive to those of you who are engineers. But the top two reasons for non-engineers are a little different, and they're tied at 41%. I wanted a career with strong job security and good compensation. So that's a motivator for engineers as well as non-engineers. And I was also looking for a career with opportunities to grow and advance. Keep that in mind because non-engineers, we'll see a little bit later on, may need a little bit more love from the engineers in the firms. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I also want to point out I wanted to have a positive impact on communities or people's lives. That's the overall, that is one, two, three, four. That's the fourth reason. Now, let's jump to the next slide where we look at younger professionals versus older professionals. And keep in mind, when we talk about younger versus older professionals, this is a mix of engineers as well as non-engineers. We could dive even further into the data and look at young engineers versus older engineers, young non-engineers versus older, so there's a lot more we can do with this data. It's a rich data set. When you look at the differences between younger and older professionals within our industry, you see that for those older professionals, they index high here on enjoying math, science, and technical subjects. So that was number one, and it was number one, but a little less for young professionals. But a couple things really jump out among these younger professionals. And of course, when I say younger professionals, in this context, in this study, we're talking about those with 5 years or less, I'm sorry, less than 5 years of experience in the industry. I wanted to have a positive impact on communities or people's lives. That's a theme that comes out again and again throughout this entire body of research that we've conducted. And so that's something that is a much stronger motivator among young people than it ever was among older professionals.
Hey, Joe, I just want to add in there that that's getting a lot of conversation in our ACEC Workforce Committee about the fact that when we look at the things we need to be doing to make it clear to it's a more attractive option for the young kids. That's where we feel like that we've got to do a much better job of driving home all the ways that engineers are positively impacting the communities, where the projects are located and how each individual project does positively impact the community. I think that alone could have a pretty significant positive impact.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we heard that loud and clear from the young professional webinar that we conducted a couple weeks back, and also at the fall conference, the ACEC fall conference. So that is definitely a theme that comes out of this research and one of the main themes. We also we asked about industry perceptions, how people perceive the engineering industry. And this was, to me, absolutely fascinating. Now, at the top level, you might not be too surprised, but when we drill down and talk a little bit about the differences between students, young professionals, older professionals, there's some really interesting perceptions that are very different. So overall, you see that one of the perceptions is firms are vary greatly from one another in culture, transparency, etc. I think that makes sense. Engineering firms offer strong job security and long-term career opportunities, and that's obviously a driving motivator for a lot of people, so that's good. Engineers make tangible, visible impact on communities and people's lives. Work-life balance is difficult to maintain due to deadlines and billable hours. So that is also a top perception. And the work is challenging, creative, and intellectually rewarding. So those are kind of those top five. Now, when we look at students, and I don't have all of the perceptions here listed, there were a lot that we tested. And so some of the ones that aren't even on the list actually come up as being top perceptions among students and young professionals. And in particular, they tell us that the industry is still largely white and male and not reflective of the general population, especially in senior roles. And also that early career professionals often face a steep learning curve and lack real world preparation. We see that students are also a little bit concerned with making that step from the sort of theoretical to the practical application. So there's some really interesting perceptions among younger people that older professionals simply do not see, feel, or it's not top of mind for them. Okay, we also asked about the biggest benefits of our industry. Why is engineering good or bad? Well, again, overall, we see that some of the biggest benefits are solving complex real world problems, working on projects that are visible and long lasting, making a meaningful impact on people's lives. And again, that strong job security and industry stability comes out there as well. So there's lots of good tangible benefits that people feel the industry has, including competitive compensation and benefits, opportunities to work in a variety of roles. So, there's a lot here that people feel is positive about the industry. And when we look at students in particular, we also see that they feel the industry they place transferable skills that apply across sectors as something that is a benefit to the industry, as well as a wide range of career options. So they are particularly see the industry as a positive there as well. Um, just looking at my notes, I want to make sure I've touched on some of the other relevant areas here. Okay, I'm going to continue to biggest concerns about a career in the engineering industry. We just talked about the biggest benefits, but what are some of the biggest concerns? Well, the biggest one is the risk of burnout, as well as the high stress and pressure to meet deadlines, the long hours or difficulty maintaining work-life balance. So those are the top three, and you can see there are others that are relatively top. They're top concerns. Not a lot of individuals selected these items, about a third, right? Burnout was about half. But these are still some of those downsides that we're hearing from the people that are in our industry about working in the industry. So there's definitely some very strong benefits, but there's also some strong concerns. Engineering students, nearly half of the students worry about a disconnect between college preparation and real world job demands. So that was something that, again, I don't even think it's on the top list here, but of all of those concerns we had, that was among the top ones for students. Also, about a third of them are anxious. And this was really, really interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, Rodney. A third of the students are anxious that artificial intelligence could reduce or replace parts of their job. That was one of their bigger concerns.
Yeah, and we hear that all the time from, employees we already have. But, I think when kids are in college, there is so much about AI just in general, not even specific to the industry, that it is driving that perception that, things such as engineering careers could be impacted, tremendously from that particular standpoint. So I think it's important for us as an industry, as part of our PR efforts, that we do a better job of explaining how AI can help maybe close the gap if we don't have enough engineers, that it's about closing some of the gap, maybe taking away some of the mundane efforts and focus on the fact that more of the engineering time could be spent on probably some of the more exciting parts of that as well. I did want to comment real quick on the burnout
Yeah.
example as well. I mean, I think there's a perception issue of the industry that we've got to make sure that we're trying to address. But also in some of our workforce committees, we did have a couple examples of young individuals who had commented that early in their career, when they were having to work late, they also looked over in the corner office, and the senior leader of the office was also working late. And their thought was, okay, so even if I'm having to work overtime now, you would hope I'd get to the point in my career to where I didn't. But apparently that's not the case, because all the senior people were there late as well. So I do think, the perception of the leaders in the companies can have a huge impact on just their perception of the industry and their long-term career option as well.
I think that's a really good point. And, we've heard and we've seen this in other studies. We didn't test it in this particular study, but, younger people tend to live by that motto, I work so that I can live, as opposed to, the opposite way around, I live to work. Right. And so as older professionals, we're more of we're living to work as that's how we were raised, right? Especially baby boomers, even more so than Gen X, which is, I'm in the Gen X category.
Joe, I was just going to add in too from the sessions that we did with the young professionals, back to the AI conversation you were talking about. One of the things that we heard that I think is compounding that is coming out of school, they're not necessarily feeling like they're ready to do the job, right? They've got the book knowledge, the technical knowledge, but they don't have the hands-on knowledge yet. And so that coupled with the fear of AI, I think is even raising that anxiety higher from what we heard from the younger folks.
Yeah, so my daughter is home. She's visiting. She's a Marine. She's not actually in college, but I was talking to her about this issue of like, what is it about AI that young people are worried about, right? She's 21 years old. She said, I don't really understand it. I don't know if it's telling me the truth or not. And when she said, I don't know if it's telling me the truth or not, I was like, oh, because I said, well, you're right. It's not always correct. She's like, I don't know when it is correct and when it's not correct. So I'm not sure. There's a lot to maybe uncover, but I do wonder if, to some extent, young people are not sure. They don't have the experience, that the older professionals have to know, yes,
To
that part is
discern.
correct and that part is not correct. So there's a lot to unpack there, a lot more for us to research. I just wanted to add in here, non-engineers working in firms tell us a different story altogether when it comes to concerns. Their most distinctive concern is feeling undervalued and being seen as overhead, reflecting a persistent divide between the technical and non-technical roles in engineering. So that is, I think, really important. So that's why I made that reference earlier that non-engineers in the firms, maybe they need to feel a little bit more love from the engineering side of the house. All right. We also asked about engineering perceptions versus other industries. And here we found some really interesting things too. Here's a net rating system. So that those of you who heard me talk about our quarterly business sentiment survey, what we did is we took the percentage of positive ratings, subtracted the percentage of what we'd say are negative ratings. So people who say it describes the industry well versus it does not describe our industry. And you'll see why this is really helpful in this particular context in a moment. So we see that overall, and in this area, we saw very, very few differences between older, younger professionals, between non-engineers and engineers and students. The perceptions of our industry versus others are pretty uniform throughout. So that was also an interesting finding for me. But job security and stability, again, that was one of those motivators we talked about earlier. So it's good that the folks in the industry feel that our industry does follow through on that. Purpose-driven work that helps people, opportunities for professional growth and learning. Again, those are the top three, and you see others here that are also important. Workplace culture, career advancement opportunities. So these are things that our industry is perceived as being particularly good at doing among those within the industry. Areas that are okay, yeah, we sort of are hitting the mark on these areas, but not quite as strongly in terms of how the engineering industry does versus other industries. Innovation and creativity, we're a little bit better there than not. Support for early career professionals, but again, remember, younger people told us earlier that they're concerned about that. Flexibility in work arrangements. Rodney, you were talking about that yourself, and that's something that's worked for you and your firm to help keep some of your workers. So these are areas where I think we could do a little bit better. We're not doing terribly, but we could be doing a little bit better. Use of cutting edge technology. Look, plus 20, so it's good, but it could be better. All right, let's look at the downside. Here's where we're not perceived as doing very well. Work-life balance, that's a negative 23, so not doing well compared to other industries. Value placed on soft skills and interpersonal abilities. I thought that was pretty interesting because later on in the survey, we're going to talk about which is more important, technical skills or soft skills. So regardless of where you come down on that, and we'll see where people feel later, we're not doing a good job of placing enough emphasis on those soft skills and interpersonal. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, not doing a great job there either. So there's a lot of areas here where I think we can really do something to help improve the perception of our industry versus those other competitive industries, which we're competing for talent, right, Rodney? As you had said, there are not just engineers, but of course the non-engineering staff, they can work in other industries besides our own. A couple key differences here. Students they perceive engineering as more innovative and creative and more likely to use cutting edge tools and AI and more adaptive. Look at that, plus 84, plus 80, plus 45. Students have a very, very different perception on a couple key areas, but look at executives on those exact same areas, they were flipped. Executives are saying, no, we're not using cutting edge technology very well. We're not integrating new tools and AI. We're not being adaptable and open to change. This was remarkable when I saw this in the results. Just completely polar opposites when you look at executives versus students. So there's a big perception gap right here. I think it's great that students see us as being very cutting edge and creative and using AI, etc. But executives are saying that that's just not the reality. And again, the students are concerned about providing support for early career professionals and that we are delivering on this feeling of belonging. So again, a little bit less likely to feel the industry is representing that. All right, before we get into skills, Daphne, do we have any questions that you want to throw out?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. There were some questions about, some of the motivations and some of the earlier questions, Joe. There were you could select multiple options, and so that's why it's not adding up to 100%. So we had a couple of questions about that.
Yep.
So question, and Rodney, maybe you can tell us how you're seeing this, but do you think that firms are putting more resources into hiring early level engineers to help offset the retention issues that might occur in the future? So I think, in other words, they're asking, are you maybe almost over hiring to, in anticipation of that? Wish
At
you could
least
find
for us,
enough people to hire, let alone overhire, right?
well, exactly. Yeah, it would be a little difficult to overhire, it seems like at times from that standpoint. I do think that we have to accept the reality that, okay, the missing middle of because we cannot find enough individuals with the kind of the mid-level experience that we're looking at, it does end up meaning that on both sides of that, both newer graduates as well as more senior individuals, that we have to say, okay, if we can find more of a certain demographic or experience group, then we just got to find a way to adapt our work to kind of make that work from that standpoint.
So here's an interesting flip to that is another comment slash question of someone who is in the older bracket. In fact, said they're 72 years old, still working, and they've noticed looking for executive positions that several firms have shown some interest, but in the final decision, not selecting the older, obviously much more experienced. Any thoughts? Are you seeing any of those type of folks coming into your mix?
Yeah, I think it probably depends on, the situation. Some of the executive positions, I'm sure, sure we're expecting, hey, this is maybe a longer term role that,
Mm,
maybe somebody at that experience level, the expectation may be, well, maybe they're, 3 to 5 years versus 10 to 15 years. But I also think the fact that, we struggle to find enough experienced individuals, you would sure feel like the industry as a whole still has a lot of positions for individuals that want to keep working in whatever roles it may be.
yeah.
Yeah, and we see that from our business sentiment study where we track job openings versus relative to the size of the firms, and we're continuing to see, 7 to 8% of firm positions are open. And when you look at that on an industry-wide scale, that translates into hundreds of thousands of open positions right now. All right, let's go on to skills needed to succeed. So this is where I was alluding to. We asked whether it's more important to have professional skills, those are the soft skills, we also call them professional skills, or whether it's more important to have technical skills or both. We gave people an option to say both. And so 66% said both, that it's important to put emphasis on both of those areas. Now, if you take those folks out who said both, there is an interesting sort of lean towards professional skills more so than technical skills. So, but by and large, both are perceived as being very, very important. All right, we asked 53 specific skills and how important each one is. So you could say it was on a 5 point scale. So you could rate each of these as being, really important or not at all important. And then we grouped those 53 specific skills into these 8 categories. So you can see the relative importance of these categories of skills. Number one is critical thinking and problem solving. I don't think that's much of a surprise given our industry. Even if you're a non engineer, that is also very important. Adaptability and self management. I think that one's really, really interesting that it came out as high as it did. And then communication and collaboration. Both of those are not technical skills, right? Adaptability, communication, collaboration, these are not technical skills. You look at technical and digital proficiency, it's actually lower in terms of importance. So I think that's something that's really interesting to me that came out of these groupings of the skill sets, and also real world readiness, not as important. I think the thought there perhaps is that, well, you'll learn on the job, and so maybe that's not quite as critical. All right, let's look at of those 53 skills, which ones came out on top and which ones came out on the bottom in terms of the most important. I will tell you, and you can tell from the previous slide, almost all of these are viewed as important, right? I mean, we're in 70, 80 percentage points are saying that these skills are important. So a lot of people feel like all these are important. But the most important, again, analytical and critical thinking, confidence to ask questions and engage with others, self motivation and personal accountability. So, again, you can just read down that list. These are the most important specific skill set. What we saw, there were some differences here. Again, there's not a lot of differences when it came to skill sets, but we did see a few differences. Younger professionals were a bit more likely to say that comfort with learning through trial and error was important. So that was something that they were a little bit more, they felt was a little more important than others, especially older professionals. Awareness of the social and environmental impact of one's work. They felt that was a little bit more important than older professionals, and recognizing the business and societal value of their work. So, again, this idea that my work matters. That's a bit more important to younger professionals than older professionals. One of the things, and I haven't talked too much about this, and we're going to run short on time here, so I'll have to go a little more quickly, but older professionals say that comfort using AI and emerging technologies is something that is very important, more so than younger people think. Client relationship building and understanding how to work with clients and external stakeholders. So it makes sense, right, that these older professionals are saying, hey, we need people who know how to work with our clients, and that's important to them. All right.
Combining that real quick with the
Yeah.
whole AI discussion, I mean, I do think that as AI gets further implemented and more of our technical tasks do become automated, I do think there will be a trend to where clients suddenly feel all their consulted options can technically solve many of the same problems because it's automated anyway, and suddenly that ability to deliver a great client experience, the client relationship part probably becomes even more important in our industry than looking in years past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Makes sense. So when we look at the least important skills, again, relatively lesser importance, but they're still important to at least two-thirds of the respondents. And we see that at the bottom, applying classroom knowledge to real world problems, again, a little bit less important, although, as you might imagine, students say that that is more important than the typical respondent. Cultural competence and sensitivity to diverse perspectives. Again, presentation and public speaking, relatively less important, but not unimportant by any means. We do see in this area, so there's a lot of areas where students say that there are a lot of these skills that are more important to them. As I mentioned, real world classroom application to real world problems, understanding of permitting, compliance or standards, awareness of societal or environmental impacts. So again, we do see these younger people are over indexing on that area. The importance of being mentored and mentoring, that's something that's important to students, and understanding and adapting to firm specific tools and workflows. They put more importance on that. All right. The really interesting thing, because there were so few differences in terms of what skills were necessary, the really interesting thing is when we ask, how well prepared do you feel you are to students and young professionals when it comes to those skills that you just told us were most important? And so what you see here is that only a third of students say they are extremely or well prepared. So there's definitely a hesitation among a lot of young people, a lot of young students that are coming out of the engineering colleges and universities and entering the workforce, that they're a little apprehensive that they don't have the necessary skills that they're going to need to be successful. So I think that's important to know that. You need to help develop those young people. But young professionals, those with, again, 5 or less years, 61% of them feel that they are extremely or well prepared. So apparently, very quickly after you get into the workforce, you're starting to feel like, okay, I can do this, I can handle this. And we even see that young professionals, when you look at non-engineers compared to engineers, the non-engineers, 70% of them, 70% of non-engineers feel that they're well prepared. So the difference, however, is when you ask mid and older professionals how well they think young professionals are prepared, and only 14% feel that young professionals are well prepared. So there is a huge disparity in perceptions here. And Rodney, I would really like to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I tell you what, it is interesting about, where's that bar? Because back on the previous, it looked like once the young professionals have been in a role for a short time, they realize they're even more prepared maybe than they thought they were. I do think a lot of this particular question here of asking the experienced people, I think it comes down to kind of their view of, probably the young students, what it is they want to be doing once they get into their career and how quickly they want to advance. I mean, I personally think that, when I see the type of like senior design projects that universities are doing today, it's way more advanced than when I was in college. So I actually personally think they're more prepared when they first come out than I was. But I think a lot of the perception issue becomes the fact that there's also the expectation that people's going to advance quicker in their career. And that's probably where the executives feel like, okay, you know what, maybe they're not as prepared quite yet to advance as quickly as they ideally would like to.
Yeah, and when we talked with the young professionals in our webinar, they were saying, look, we feel we are prepared. We feel like we're more prepared than you're giving us credit for. So there's definitely, two sides of the coin here, and maybe the reality is somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll say too, I think also that gap in the middle where there's not most firms don't have enough experienced people, therefore they need and want their new grads to be able to jump in, even at maybe a higher level too quickly, and maybe that's part of that perception issue as well.
Yeah, good point. So I had to skip one whole section because we were running short on time. It's called The Ideal Employer. So go read the report. There's a lot of interesting information about what young people are looking for out of their employers, and the flexibility, adaptability issue comes up there again as well as having meaningful work. So those are a couple themes in that section. But I wanted to leave a few minutes here for some additional questions, Daphne.
Yeah, I wanted to just give Rodney a minute to, if he had any additional thoughts on what the workforce committee was working on as you see these results, right? And think about the work that you're doing. Is there anything else that you want to share with the audience that they should be aware of related to the work of the committee?
Yeah, absolutely. And just real quick, if anyone does have interest in joining in with their committee to help try to work on these issues, please do go to the ACEC main webpage. You'll be able to find pretty quickly how to sign up for the ACEC Workforce Committee. But we really split this issue into two big pots. One is about how do we better attract more students into the industry and then retain them as they go through their college career. And then the other big pod is kind of once they're in our industry, how do we do a better job of retaining and developing them? Because this workforce issue, it was not the issue is not created overnight and it's not going to be fixed overnight. So we realize it's going to have to be a combination of maybe some low-hanging fruit items that allows us to make some positive impacts quickly, but also we got to be working on some things that's just going to turn the trend around over time as well. So I guess my main message is we need all the help we can get, and anyone that's interested in working on either part of that about how do we better attract more into the industry or how do we better retain and develop them? We've got a lot of subcommittees that are working on a lot of different components of that.
And that's a great segue. I know that we're up against the hour, but I did want to just say there are several other questions we didn't get to. Join the committee. It is a great group of executives, HR professionals, a lot of talented folks involved. They don't have all the answers, but they're sharing with each other, learning from each other, and really helping to drive the industry forward. I want to give a big shout out to the ACEC Research Institute donors who make this research possible. Without them, we would not be able to deliver this to you. So thank you. I know many of you are on the call. If you're not currently a donor and would like to get engaged, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you about how to do that. And then maybe, Joe, we can just jump to the end for the QR code so that folks can scan that real quick before they sign off. If they haven't already downloaded the report, this is a great way to get to it quickly. Um, Rodney, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your insights, both from the committee perspective and your role as a CEO. Is very helpful to hear from you. Joe, thanks as always for delivering lots of great data, more data than we ever have time for. Appreciate your work on this report. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the next Future of Engineering Roundtable. Have a great day and be well.